welcome to the Craft Brewed Music Podcast, the official podcast of Craft Brewed Music, the home of small batch streaming. Here we explore better music for serious listeners and those who create it. I'm Brian Horner, founder and curator of Craft Brewed Music, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host Aaron Stamen, a Craft Brewed Music artist. Hello, Aaron. How's it going?
I'm great. How you doing?
Good. Excellent to have you here for our first Craft Brewed Music Podcast interview. So we've got Derek Brown, a Craft Brewed Music artist, here with us tonight. He's got 40 million plus views across social media. He's been featured on NPR's Weekend Edition, performances on his recent 50/50 tour in all 50 U.S. states and more than 30 countries around the world. He's a Billboard charting saxophonist, composer, and innovator. Jazz journalist Scott Yenow commented that Brown performs unaccompanied solos that occasionally make one recall Bobby Mcferrin in his early prime and the great saxophonist Eddie Harris, utilizing slap-tonguing, circular breathing, a wide interest in musical styles, and dazzling coordination to create rather unique music. Unique to say the least. We're going to listen to one of Derek's first viral hits, Catch 'Em Up, from his 2016 debut album, Beatbox Sax. This is Derek Brown. Hey, Derek, thanks so much for being here with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian. This is fun.
So, Catch 'Em Up, the song that started all for you, huh?
It is, yes, the first song I ever played on the saxophone back when I was in 5th grade. Yeah, right. No, what you're referring to, I would refer to it as well as that. The song that started the beatbox sax movement. And I'm you can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes with my fingers for the beatbox sax movement.
I can hear the quotes.
Yeah.
Because as I like to say, I don't really beatbox. It's like vocally, you don't want to hear that. And people just started saying like, hey, that kind of sounds like you're beatboxing and playing the saxophone. And I'm like, well, it's really slap tonguing and then extended techniques, double. And they're like, whatever. It sounds like beatboxing. Okay.
So you you were in school like as recently as 2008. You got your master's degree, and then you were director of a jazz program at a college in Texas. Did
Yeah.
were you leading a traditional jazz band, or did you have them all beatboxing? When did
No,
this start?
the beatboxing thing was I did not know that was gonna be a thing. Yeah, I mean, I went to school for well, first it was classical and then jazz, and I remember thinking, "Yeah, I'm gonna go to New York City and, just be a jazz sax player, make it rich, make my millions." Um, but some various moments along the way helped me realize some things, and I probably the most powerful thing was when I was doing my master's program. I was a grad assistant at University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, a great school, and I was in charge of a combo, like just a beginning combo. They kind of pass for the grad, give it to the grad students to be in charge of. And there was a freshman sax player who was in my group that I was supposed to be coaching, and he was, I kid you not, twice as good as me at jazz. And I had this like midlife crisis, at
Yeah,
like 22 or whatever. But like, how am I supposed to make it out there if I'm not even the best? This kid who's half my age is twice as good as me. I'm not even the best one in this room, let alone the city. And that was when I had kind of this hard come to Jesus moment of I I think if I am gonna make it, which I wasn't even probably thinking of this, I was just dark thoughts and like it's hopeless. But
sure.
later on, I realized if I am gonna make it out there in the music industry, I've got to kind of find my own way. I can't just try to also be a clone of Sonny Rollins or John Coltrane, because I realized then there are thousands upon thousands of sax players much better than me that are also trying to be clones of the same, classic jazz artists. And so I wouldn't stand a chance that way. And that kind of helped give me this boost of like, what if I am going to play this instrument? And I've had times where I almost wanted to give up, including around that time. But if I am actually going to do this instrument, I need to play it exactly how I want to play it. And it needs to be totally true to me, what I want to do, not what I think I'm supposed to do.
And so, how did you get from there to catch him up?
Good question. Yeah. So there were lots of influences along the way, and some of those influences were even before this kind of midlife crisis. But I mean, have always tried to have very open ears, and sometimes I almost felt bad about that. When you're at a serious conservatory for music, you're supposed to just listen to one thing for a
Yeah.
while. And I understand that, because you want to, if you want to learn German, it's best to like only speak German for a while. But I was this kind of stray cat where I was like also checking out world music and listening to a lot of like Bela Fleck and the Flecktones, not straight ahead jazz, but stuff that I really liked. Not just listening to sax players. And a huge one for me was coming across the music of Bobby Mcferrin,
Hmm.
um, the
Mm-hmm.
great vocalist, and just the way that he's able to create this full sound with just one monophonic voice. And when I realized the saxophone's also monophonic, we're only supposed to do one note at a time, yet here's this amazing singer doing these concerts just by himself on stage, totally acoustic, and there's nothing missing. And holy cow, how is he doing that? And by that point, I had kind of maybe dabbled in a little bit of these extended techniques. I think because of my classical upbringing as well, so I had kind of dabbled in the slap tonguing stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and I had heard a lot of the stuff used in the context of usually very avant-garde stuff. So whether that's like really contemporary classical music where it's just very much kind of sound effects, not really necessarily rhythmic. I hadn't heard a lot of that. Or like avant-garde free jazz where once again it's used as like just this kind of sound effect, or um something like that, like just kind of a passable little boop.
Right.
And when
Mm-hmm.
I started hearing someone like Bobby McFerrin, or some beatboxers, or they call it like fingerstyle guitar players who are hitting their instrument and kind of making their own groove. I immediately wanted to try to use those techniques in that way and see if I could do something percussively and accompany myself. There are some other reasons, like, so after grad school, I was teaching in this town of Abilene, Texas, the mecca
Yeah.
of jazz, as you know.
We all know, yes.
Yes. Actually, yeah, it's a pretty small town and not a ton of sax players, not a ton of musicians. There were some good cats there, but so I ended up doing a lot of stuff on my own. Like I would do like get requests to do wedding receptions or something, and or like I volunteered at a nonprofit, and they would say, "Hey, Derek, could you provide music for this event?" And I'd be like, "How much is it going to pay anything?" No. So instead of asking the few other people to play, I'd be like, "Well, maybe I can just play myself." It's always a little awkward on just a saxophone
Sh-
compared to a piano.
Sure. And so, what were the early manifestations of that? What was that? What did that look like?
Yeah, so at first, I mean, I was always intrigued I've always been intrigued with improvisation and jazz. And so I very much would just kind of outline the chord changes. And that was always kind of part of my solo. I loved actually for the listeners to hear the chords. And so a lot of arpeggiating. And then I realized, you know what? I think I can slap tongue these bass notes, get this thunk. And it kind of sounds like an electric bass guitar slapping a string. And so it's like, oh, I could kind of I could play a B flat blues and kind of slap the bass line, on the downbeats and then play. And then I realized with this pop sound effect, I could kind of maybe do a backbeat. So doom, doom, and then maybe I could even fill in the notes in between. And so it started off very improvisatory, but it was very, very rough. But it was super fun for me. And then gradually I started to see if I could do it to songs, like taking melodies, like taking Tenor Madness. And I wonder, and to do that, I didn't have the ability to, because I hadn't been practicing this a ton. I had to actually sit down and write out the melody and, okay, let's see. Because once again, monophonic instrument, you can't do a bass note and a melody at the same time. So you have to choose. Oh, if I do the bass note on the downbeat, I can't play that melody note on one. So maybe I could move that melody note just an eighth note ahead. And so started doing that, and so kind of working on songs. Then I started kind of writing my own stuff, and all of that together, because sometimes people ask me how do you compose your music or a song, and it's one of two ways. Sometimes it's trying to do the melody or the chord progression, and then through that I try to figure out, oh man, I wonder if there isn't a way to do a bass line on eighth notes in the melody, but maybe if I double tongue and do the melodies on the cuz in between up high. So then I would work on this new extended technique and try to see if I could do that. But then there are other times where I'd be working on an actual extended technique, things like playing with rings or vocal slapping, these some terms that I've come up with, some that have already existed. And then it'd be like, oh, this is a really cool technique. I wonder if I could make a song based on this. And so, yeah, and then Catch 'Em Up came out, and that was right around the time when my wife and I were like, man, this teaching gig is great. I'm doing this. I had done this for 6 years full time, and it was a great career, but it was almost like I was doing things backwards because other professors there in the music side of things, they had already done some performing in their young days, and now they wanted to settle down, raise a family, and have a stable career. And I went right to that teaching job. I got lucky getting that, but I was like, I'd always had this itch to perform. And once again, I wasn't thinking of not in a million years would I have thought that solo sax would be my thing. But I just was like, man, it's kind of now or never. And so my wife and I decided, let's move to Chicago. Let's go to a big city. It was a little closer to home. And let's just see what happens. I'm just going to devote, at least a couple years, see what happens if I just focus on music and kind of putting, trying to a bunch of different avenues. So I just tried to like get in as many bands as I could. Playing some like pop cover bands, a jazz group, a fusion group, um, anything I could. Just try to get into the scene, which was kind of hard for me because I'm a little bit more introverted. But it was just me knowing I had limited time. Let's just do it. And then I was also working on this solo sax stuff. I put out that video, Catch 'Em Up. This was like, I don't even remember the year, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And it got a really good response. And I was just like, whoa, okay, maybe I should do more of this. And yeah, from then on, it just became this pursuit of mine, almost obsession, I guess, of mine. What else can I do on the solo saxophone? How far can I take this?
I love that the genesis of this is trying to play these what are fundraiser events in Abilene, Texas, and like, and it's like one guy with the saxophone, like, how can I make this work? So it's like a cool thing for everybody.
Well, I remember at some of those events, because there were multiple events like that, these fundraiser things, and I remember some of the people being like, kind of giving weird looks. And I remember one was kind of a Christmas thing, and I did it with a bunch of Christmas songs. And I remember one lady is just kind of etched in my mind of saying like, "Can't you just play a normal song?" And I was just like, isn't this cool? Yeah.
So you talked about kind of starting the style almost to be functional as a solo player, and I was thinking about the fact that being a solo player, it's so much easier and more efficient to tour. I'm not talking about how easy or difficult it might be to get the gigs, but once you're out there, you're having to pay one person, house one
Yeah.
person, fly one person. And so, everything you do works so well artistically. And I was wondering, if some of it stemmed from, logistical or strategic considerations
Yeah. I mean,
as you
that's a
went
good
on with this.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I felt like it was the extremes of it was definitely ideal, like you said, for traveling or just for making money with this. And I honestly don't know how people start off in ensembles, combos, that haven't made a name for themselves. I just can't imagine, taking the paychecks that I have and then splitting it 5 ways and trying to
Mhm.
make a living with that. But so yeah, it did make travel much easier. And I will admit that is one of the reasons I have kind of stubbornly so far stuck to totally acoustic saxophone,
Mhm.
because so many times people will say like, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's really cool. You should have you ever done like looping and electronics?" And I've experimented with that. And I did experiment with that during that Abilene, Texas time at some of those functions. I went all out with like a computer looper and effects pedals, and I even had this like giant keyboard that I could hit with my foot to play bass lines, just
Hmm.
total one-man band. And it just got so overwhelming. Like you hit one wrong button and it just stops. Plus it,
Right.
it takes like 3 hours to set up, and you're kind of freaking out that the computer's going to slow down. Plus the speakers that you're coming out of never sound as good as your acoustic sax.
Right.
And so it was just like, this is so frustrating. Plus, yeah, the setup, and I'm just gonna slide that setup under the bed. I'm just gonna see how far I can go acoustically. And I'm really now, okay, sometime in the future I may get back into that stuff. I occasionally dabble with that stuff. But I'm really glad that I set that limitation on myself. And I've heard other artists kind of in all different genres talk about that, like the freedom that comes with limitations.
Mhm.
We would normally think limiting is the opposite of freedom. We should have no rules, but it's when you limit yourself that you actually give yourself, a direction to go. It gives you something to start with. Like nothing is more terrifying than like the blank page, for an artist. Like, it's paralyzing. What do I do?
Mhm.
But having kind of this goal of just, I can only do one note at a time. I can only use this piece of machinery, this saxophone? What can I come up with? That's been kind of creatively freeing for me. And it's gotten me to stretch in ways that I don't think I ever would have had I done more of the electronic looping. Like, for instance, when I had a looper, it's like, here's how it would always go. And this is how it always goes when you see someone looping, usually. They hit record on the looper and then they do a percussion groove, like hitting the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
They do it for 8 seconds. Then they hit playback, and then that goes on. Okay, now they hit record again. They do a bass line. And then play that back. Now they do a little like harmony part. I'm for some reason I have Michael Jackson.
It's Billie Jean. I was with you the whole way. I was like, that's exactly the looper tune I would do first was Billie Jean. Yes,
that's awesome. And so anyways, yeah, and then you do the looper again, and then you record the melody, and okay, that's awesome. That's cool, and there's some really cool musicians doing looping stuff. But had I just stuck with that, I wouldn't have done much. I wouldn't have really broken any boundaries there. Like, I don't think I would have done much outside of the box. The fact that I couldn't do the looping forced me to think, I wonder, okay, how could I do percussive and a bass line stuff at the same time? Well, maybe, I'm doing percussive stuff with my mouth, slap tonguing, pops, these kind of things. But maybe I could actually hit the instrument with rings, like hit it on a thumb hook. And so I got into that element. Maybe I could use my feet, and like a drummer, drummers are able to use all of their appendages. Why can't sax players? So I could kind of stomp for a kick sound. And then maybe maybe I could do slap tonguing, and I could actually kind of open my mouth and sing something, kind of a harmony part at the same time. And maybe I could use triple tonguing with the upper notes on the upbeats, and this, all these new kind of techniques. And like I was saying, a lot of these things players have been doing for years. It's just how I'm kind of putting it together in my own way. And maybe there are some things that I kind of came up with, but like I said, I don't think I would have come up with those things had I had that other helper tool. Now, someone else might feel limited by just acoustic and they need that looping to grow. But for me, man, having those limitations and kind of stubbornly sticking with it has been so good for me. It hasn't been easy, and that's the other flip side of that coin. Like we said, it was easier to tour, to travel, make a living. But man, convincing, especially at the beginning, convincing like festival directors, especially club owners, that I could actually do a full show or a full set. And I would have the same reservations too. If like a solo trumpet player came to me, and they're like, I do a 90-minute solo trumpet, and I'd be like, I wouldn't even look at the email. It's like, what? So and so many times people would say, you have a band, right? No. Do you? Oh, you use like electronics and loop? No, it's just acoustic. Yeah. And then and even when I point them to a YouTube video, I mean, understandably, that's not even enough, because that's just a 3-minute clip of like, oh, that's cool. Like a lot of actual vocal beatboxers, you see a lot of like clips of them playing upward maximum like 15 minutes. I haven't really seen concerts. And so that was such a challenge, but man, that was such a creatively fulfilling challenge, that I have tried to fully embrace. This idea of like, can I carry a show? I'm going to think about it from the beginning to end, song to song. How can I build excitement? How can I have surprises in the set? How can I use the space of the stage? How can I play the saxophone in different ways on different songs so it's not the same? How can I slowly introduce it? Can I sing? Can I walk out in the audience? All these kind of things that, I'm proud of how it's evolved. But understandably, I understand that people would be very skeptical that would be entertaining.
Derek, it's been such a pleasure doing some more intensive listening to your catalog.
Cool.
The last couple of weeks. Really, it's great stuff. And as I hear you talking about the experience with the looping, and then going back to the kind of minimalist, constrain yourself in terms of what you got available to you. The piece I always come back to, and I love your version of this, is Chameleon.
Okay.
You can kind of hear, you can almost hear the process there, because it
almost
does
sounds like a loop.
because it builds that way, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not. It's like okay, there's the bass line. It's like what space do you have in here? Okay, there's like the rhythm, and like the part the melody's coming, and like it fits in every little. And it's monophonic, yet and, like every little thing has a space, but it has a timbre
Cool.
and has a level, and it's so cool that it builds like an ensemble. And it's really a great example of that. By limiting yourself to that scale, you had to figure out how to make it work, and it sounds like there's a bunch of dudes playing together. It's really cool.
Yeah, another big influence for me was, because I obviously like percussion, and I've played around with drum set a little bit, but a huge thing for me has been playing the djembe or the
Hmm.
cajon. And those listening, the djembe is just kind of the drum that you put kind of in between your legs. This kind of African drum that you're hitting with your two hands. Um, and why that was so key for me was, unlike the drum set where you can do these polyphonic sounds and rhythms, you can play the hi-hat at the exact same time as the bass and the exact same time as the snare. On the djembe, it's just like the sax. It's monophonic. You have to choose, am I going to do a bass sound, or am I going to do a slap sound, or am I going to do kind of this like just kind of filler sound? And then you also have to think like, am I going to do it with my right hand or left hand? And so anyways, it just got me kind of thinking about like, oh yeah, here's where the bass would go, here's where the slap would go, and I could do the kind of the same thing with the sax. But then even taking it further, I do a lot of like this double tonguing technique, this taka taka taka. You're using kind of the front and back of your tongue. And on a song like Chameleon or Catch 'Em Up, my tongue is actually just going forward and backwards, kind of like a right hand, left hand drum. like basically the entire song, going
Mhm.
taka 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 kut kut taka taka tuka chika cha. And if I want to do a bass note on the downbeat, I do it on the front part of the tongue with a slap. If I want it on the upbeat, I had to learn to do it on the back part of my tongue with a ram. These different kind of techniques. If I want to do it on the melody, if I just did a slap with the what would be the left hand, I need to do on the right hand melody. It was just very kind of one-to-one, kind of made sense to me. But yeah, I've always been a huge proponent of, just experimenting with different instruments. The better you become at any other instrument, the better you become on your main instrument too.
One of the things I've been listening to a lot this last week is of Eddie Van Halen as a guitar
Yeah.
player. You cannot escape the radius of Eddie Van Halen, and I mean he's a guy who's an innovator. He just took the electric guitar in places. I mean everybody sounds a little like Eddie Van Halen now because his influence was just so broad. But he develops these techniques, some of which were around before, some of which he just perfected with the tapping and artificial harmonics and use of the tremolo. Um, and but he was a showman, so there was always a moment of like athleticism for Eddie Van Halen. It's like, wow, what is he going to do? Like it's just like
Yeah.
it's incredible to behold the thing. Um, but he was also a guy who could take these amazing techniques and channel them into a musical expression. And one of my questions to you is, how do you kind of strike that balance between being a showman who can do something that most people can't do, that is a spectacle, that's a piece of showmanship, and then you
Yeah.
also have an ethos that's your art, and you want to use those techniques toward making an emotional space. And how do you create that balance for yourself?
Yeah. Okay. That's a big can of worms I could talk about for a long time. Where do I start with that?
Well, let's
Uh,
move on then. So,
hey, we got a couple hours, right? No. One of my favorite quotes of all time. I wish it was mine. It was actually by this guy who wrote. He wasn't a famous musician. I don't even know his name. I should learn his name. He wrote a book on playing with synthesizers. There's a time when I was getting to that. And at the beginning of the book, he said this. And this is like my thought on music. He said, "There are two types of music in this world: good music and bad music. And I like them both." And that is totally me. So, there is the artistic, challenging music, kind of the traditional classical jazz of the world, where we listen, for art purposes, to grow, to challenge ourselves, to hear something new. And that's awesome. And I love that stuff. But then there's also this straight up like candy pop, totally for entertainment, just to dance to, or maybe even background music, just to have fun with. And as much as I like having a fine wine or a fine steak or an aged cheese, something a kid would hate, you have to experience it. Sometimes I just want candy. Sometimes I just want McDonald's, And so totally my range of music that I like to listen to, and I think the range that I play as well, it's always kind of going in between. Maybe it's kind of in the middle, but it's always in between. And it wasn't until I kind of fully embraced that. That was another key moment in my musical development. It was after, once again, because I don't think this could happen really in a conservatory where you're only supposed to like, the art side. Um, but it was after I was out of school. And once again, it's like, if I'm going to do music, I've got to really want to do it. And it actually happened at I was watching a Grammys, and most serious musicians I know do not watch the Grammys, because they're like, oh, they just show the pop stuff, the dancing and the whatever. And so I watched it kind of begrudgingly. I was kind of jealous of everybody on there. And I remember specifically it was like a Justin Bieber and Usher tune. And they were like just dancing. And I remember like my foot was tapping. And it was almost the thing where it's like, what, stop? What are you doing, Derek? Like, don't, this is not, this is not good. But then I just kind of like let down my guard and was like, this is just fun. And music needs to be fun sometimes. And once again, like, it shouldn't all well, I mean, I'm a proponent of, yeah, you want both of those spectrums, but like I said, you want both. And so that was when I kind of fully started to embrace, like, I love pop music. I love 80s music. This music that I want to write with these extended techniques, I'm going to just use like pop chords, just like 1 5 6 4, stuff like that, and not feel ashamed about it. And that was like a huge, huge thing in my development where yeah, just 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 realizing, because a lot of us that went to music school, we are afraid of composition. There's composition majors that do that. Or in the jazz world, you have to kind of write with enough complexity. You can't just write
Mhm.
triads. You have to use like a
Mhm.
flat 9 sharp 11 on everything. um, and so it was when I finally realized I can just write simple stuff. But it just so happened that the way that I'm playing it is very complex, but not because I'm trying for it to be complex. Yes, I will admit sometimes, Aaron, in answer to your question, sometimes I do write a piece because it's like, okay, I'm working on triple tonguing. I just want to play something really fast because this is just going to be fun and kind of like crazy.
Mhm.
Um, but you can only do that so much, I think, before you kind of get jaded, or if it's only about like getting people, especially if it's only about like what's going to get the most YouTube video views, that will burn you out. And I have stories of that happening to me already. But you have to eventually just do stuff for you. And some people might just like that stuff, but I also just have to do stuff because it sounds nice. And so yeah, and that would be kind of the art side. Or another thing would be maybe because it's a challenge for me, and that could fall on either side. Um, but I mean, very very much so. I'm all about putting myself into the audience. This is another thing you don't hear talked about a lot at conservatories, because as soon as you start talking about the audience or the audience's perspective, with when you're talking about that with serious musicians, people immediately think of like the worst words you could call someone in music, which is a sellout. It's like the
Mhm.
worst thing in the world. Um, Saying that, oh, you're just doing it for the money, you're just trying to get more views. But no, I think all musicians can agree on this, that music is like, it's like a language, it's a type of communication. We're trying to communicate something, an emotion, whatever, an idea. We all have different ideas, different people we're trying to communicate, but there's a communication, and you can't have communication without the other side. And what good is a communication if you don't even think about the other side? Like if you're a speech writer and you're not even thinking about what kind of a conference you're writing a speech for. Um, and so that just seems like a basic thing, is like putting yourselves in the audience shoes. And that's where I think like I can learn a ton from like pop musicians, from watching the Grammys. And no, not every musician like is going to be trying to reach the same people that Justin Bieber is reaching, and they have something different to say than Justin Bieber. It might be very serious, it might be dark, it might be challenging, but still you're trying to communicate something. And so musicians, we need to put ourselves into that audience and think about, how would I receive what I'm doing? Would I actually like what I'm listening to, or would this actually mean something to me? Would I be bored? Would I be challenged? Whatever you're trying to convey. And that's a really difficult thing for us musicians to face. I've met some sax players, and I'm not picking on classical music at all. I love classical music, but a lot of classical sax players that if you ask them what they listen to, like classical saxophone is maybe the last thing they would even mention. And so it's like, wait, you don't even want to listen to the stuff that you're playing, that you're hoping people will listen to you. And of course that's not always the case. But that was like a really hard thing to face, but so important for me. Like, do I actually like what I'm playing? Would I actually listen to this? Would I actually want to pay money to see this performance? And then thinking about everything I do, from the music to then just basic, like what I'm doing on stage. Am I talking between songs? What am I wearing? what do I do in between? Should I move? All this kind of stuff. And some of that stuff, like a lot of times, once again, when you think about like, oh, movement, like, oh, that's cheesy. And that's like a thing. I don't like it when musicians like kind of over move and it seems like an act. And so I don't do that. But I also like it when musicians talk in between songs. So I do that. I don't like awkward silences in between songs. I don't like the loop building kind of awkwards working on the pedals. And so I, try to avoid those things. And so I've just learned so much just by facing that difficult reality of like, what's actually coming out of you, Derek, and is that enjoyable? Yeah, and I would just
That's it. Yeah, that's a
encourage
really
others
great
to.
point. That's a great point. So your new record, we've talked about your writing and how the limitations you placed on yourself to do this all by yourself. Of course, your new record, All Figured Out, is with a jazz ensemble,
Whoa,
and so
where'd
that
that
must
come
have
from?
been a very you had to know that was going to come up, that we were going to put the lie to your whole "I do it all by myself"
Oh,
thing.
good.
So so that must have been a very different writing process.
Very different. It didn't completely come out of nowhere, because up to that point, like, so my first album, Beatbox Sax, totally just me, and recorded in my bedroom, just one sax, just me. Second album, about half of the songs are collaborations. I do something with the great Jeff Coffin, who's also on Craft Brewed Music. I
Yes,
do
he
something
is.
with a rapper. I do something with my wife. I do some more singing stuff. I even at the end of that one, I do this America the Beautiful
Hmm.
collaboration with 50 sax players. And so that was just writing for a bunch of musicians. So I'd kind of slowly been growing into this. But where this came about was for doing a full album with a big band. Um, Came about when I started touring, and particularly for this 50/50 tour, where if you don't know, I to promote this album 50/50, my wife and I borrowed an RV and we traveled to all 50 states in 9 months, and I played a gig in all 50 states. And
That's amazing.
thanks, yeah. And we also, another amazing thing is a kid popped out after the trip. So funny how that might happen if you spend 9 months in an RV with your wife.
Was it the kid of the person who you borrowed the RV from?
No, you didn't get where I was going with that. No, but I can say my father-in-law was like, "We should have gotten you guys an RV 13 years ago." We'd been married 13 years. Um, but so lots of good came from that trip. But one of the things was, as I started touring, and one of my most common tour stops are universities where I will do a solo concert in the evening and then maybe some master classes, clinics with the students during the day. But a lot of times these universities, of course, they all have jazz bands. A lot of them have saxophone ensembles. And a lot of them along the way would say, "Hey, would you like to play with our big band? I know you do a little bit of jazz, Derek. Maybe you could play some tunes or with our sax ensemble." And I'd say, "Yeah, sure, that sounds fun." And then they would say, "What tunes do you want to play?" And at first it was like, well, I mean, I guess I'll just do, standard Count Basie blues stuff. And then I realized, on those tunes, I'm just playing like a normal sax player, which is fun for me, to just improvise normally and play regular old melodies. But it wasn't really my style, and I couldn't really find ways. It was kind of hard to blend if you listen most of my solo stuff, like it's not really swinging in the jazz sense of the term. It's kind of more funky. And so, anyways, one of the stops was with the Portland Jazz Ensemble, Portland, Maine. And I thought, before I said, "Yeah, well, you guys can just pick some songs," I said, "You know what? Maybe I could like write something." It was like a couple months out. And I was even thinking of like getting with some arranger in Chicago where I was living at the time and saying, "Hey, could you turn one of my solo tunes?" But I was just kind of thinking like, no, how would I do this? Like maybe I could do, maybe I do kind of a cadenza intro, but then maybe there's a part where the band cuts out and it's just me and the saxes and I'm kind of doing the rhythm. Or maybe I could like, it's kind of thinking really specifically about how I could do my stuff with an ensemble, because it's not just totally intuitive in the sense that, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I do, it's because there is not a drummer or because there is not a bass player. And so that's why I'm throwing in those percussive things and those bass lines. So when there is a drummer, it's like, well, I'm not just going to do my beatbox stuff with that. That doesn't make sense. So I had to kind of think in a different way. And soon enough, I was messing around with, my Muse Score, that free notation software where you can kind of hear it back. And soon enough, I had a couple of tunes, and I sent that to them in Maine, and it was a lot of fun. And honestly, it was the first time in my life, one of the first times in my life, where I really felt like I was like a jazz guest artist, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Normally, I'm this like beatbox sax guy, which it's just my own genre. And a lot of times this surprises people sometimes, but I've been more embraced by the classical community. And that's because if you know the saxophone, contemporary classical saxophone world, it's all about extended techniques. A lot of it is. And in jazz, not so much. You don't hear jazz players doing slap tonguing or double tonguing, really. So I'd been kind of embraced by the classical, and I always had a hard time kind of getting into the jazz side. And so this was one of the first times where it was just like, wow, what a jazz art. And yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Labels don't mean anything. But it was just really fun to just bring out this different element and being able to kind of also improvise with a rhythm section, and find different unique ways of throwing in some of these techniques when they were appropriate. Plus, I mentioned the whole, like, I really like pop a lot of times. This was a chance I could write it as poppy as I wanted to. I could write just pleasing sounding chord changes that really made sense to me this day and age. I love a lot of the classic jazz stuff, but if I'm totally honest, I didn't grow up with it. I grew up with a lot of like cheesy, what would be considered cheesy 80s music, Bryan Adams, Tears for Fears. No matter how much, and I have tried and tried to like love, I'll even say it, a Love Supreme, or some other like later Coltrane. I will never like this sounds like this is blasphemy. So many people are going to turn off the station right now.
I'm glad this is a remote interview.
Just say it.
I love Tears for Fears more than a Love Supreme. I'm just going to say it.
Oh my God.
I know. Okay. And I know I'm just comparing a band with an album.
We should have just moved on.
But anyways, that's just because music is so personal, and it's so, it's so subjective.
Absolutely.
Of what memory, music is so much tied with memory, as much as we want it to be like, this is a good piece because it's good. No, this is a good piece because it's reminding you of other things that you've listened to, or it's just the right amount of surprise, but just the right amount of, man, I have to tell this story. This is one of those beautiful things I've heard recently about music as memory. And it was I forget who this was. It was someone like a New York Times writer was talking about their son, and this woman's son liked hardcore screamo music. Like, she hated this music, like death metal, and he was always in his room blasting this stuff as loud as he could. She just hated it. And anyways, the sad thing is the son actually tragically died as a teenager. And she said, and I'm getting like emotional talking about this. I'm glad this isn't video, so you can't see it. My eyes are tearing up. But she said after this happened, when she felt closest to her son was when she would walk into his room and she would turn on that screamo as loud as she could. And she was like, I'm getting really emotional. I'm sorry.
Wow.
But it was like he was there, and she could like feel him, and she like loved that. And so that's just it talks about the power of music and how much it's tied with memory and how that's so unique for each one of us. And so for me, like I said, it was just so key to learn that, man, as much as I'm trying to like this traditional jazz or whatever, and I do like it, don't get me wrong, I like it, but it just doesn't touch my heartstrings the same way as just a simple do ga do ga do God, with tons of reverb, you know, and this
Mhm.
epic sound. And so when I freed myself up, I could write music for a big band that's kind of like that. You know, I sometimes would jokingly say with the musicians, this is not traditional jazz. This is arena rock jazz. And you can maybe hear that a little bit if you know, some of the songs. And yes, I'm using it. It's kind of like the beatbox sax in the sense that I'm not, you know, I just mentioned I love this like, you know, this like 80s drum beat with tons of reverb, cheesy synth, you know, the cheesier the better. But yet again, I'm not playing those instruments. It's kind of like my way of doing it is using maybe like a traditional instrument acoustically to try to get those sounds, and that kind of brings out my own voice, I guess. And so that's
Mhm.
kind of what I'm doing with the big band, where, you know, we're using an upright acoustic bass, we're using an acoustic piano. Yeah, there's a little bit of guitar with some distortion at times, but we're using these traditional wind instruments, but trying to get this like arena rock sound. Um, I'm not really sure why I'm sticking once again to the acoustic thing. But you know, that's I guess that's how art is created. You know, it's never something just brand new, an alien life form implanted in your brains, or it's God given. I think it's always, you know, Steve Jobs said it best: creativity is connecting things. That's it. And
Mhm.
so, you know, the best, I think the best, most creative people in the world would say that they're just, and I'm not putting myself into that group, but they're just connecting things that just weren't connected before. They're taking a little bit of this and putting with that. Let's try, what if I did this genre, but with this instrument that doesn't belong in that genre? You know, Bela Fleck and the Flecktones is coming to mind again, of that
Mhm.
idea of a banjo. You know, Bela's not the first person to play music that sound like, but maybe he's on a banjo, you know, and using the electric banjo and playing funk with that. You know, he's not the first person to come up with a funk groove, but man, when he does it on a banjo, I've never heard that before. You know, and that is creativity, and we're all just trying to find kind of our own unique way, and I guess that's my take.
Well, thanks so much for telling us the story. It's fascinating, and it's a perfect fit for craft brew music, and it's really exciting to have you here
Cool.
for our first podcast interview.
Yeah, honored to be here and share. I mean, I never would have thought, honestly, this is honest, that even 8 years ago, that anyone would be interested in what I have to say. So I'm always happy to share.
Derek, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. Love all the tunes. Love the new album. We'd really love to hear you play a selection for us if you wouldn't
I could
mind.
sure do that. Here's a little bit of a tune I wrote. I talked about this one earlier, called Spitfire.
Thanks for listening. For more Craft Brewed music, visit craftbrewedmusic.com. Please feel free to rate, review, and share the show. See you next time.